June 22, 1941, 03 a.m., on the banks of the Bug River, occupied Poland. The air is unnervingly still, heavy with the scent of damp pine and the metallic tang of 3.7-centimeter Pak 36 grease. Gefreiter Erich Müller of the 18th Panzer Division grips the cold steel of his hatch. For weeks, the rumors have been of fever, whispers of a crusade, of 3 million men poised to strike east, of a living space waiting to be carved from the Russian steppe. Müller watches the Soviet side of the river. It is dark, silent. There are no searchlights, no frantic movements of Ivan waking up. He checks his watch, 03:15. This is the moment the world is supposed to break. The artillery should be screaming by now. The sky should be a canopy of Messerschmitts. But the guns are silent. Behind Müller, the vast machinery of Army Group Center isn't surging forward. Instead, the engines are being cut. Orders filter down through the ranks, not in the triumphant roar of a blitzkrieg, but in the low, hurried hushes of confused NCOs. "Engines off," the sergeant barks, his face a mask of disbelief. "We're digging in." The invasion, the crusade against Bolshevism, has been aborted. In the high-ceilinged war rooms of the Wolfschanz, a different map is being pinned over the east. Hitler has looked west, toward the smudge of the British Isles, and decided that the Red Menace can wait. Müller doesn't know it yet, but the silence he hears isn't peace. It is the sound of a ticking clock. The German High Command has just made a gamble that will redefine the century, not by what they started, but by what they chose to ignore. They believe they have avoided a two-front war. The truth, buried in the declassified Halder diaries and the suppressed reports of the Abwehr, is that they have simply traded a quick death for a slow, agonizing strangulation. August 1941. The U-boat pens at Lorient, France. The concrete roof of the Karaman 3 bunker is 7 meters thick, a mountain of reinforced stone designed to laugh at British 500-pounders. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of battery acid and cheap tobacco. Korvettenkapitän Hans-Werner Krauss watches his Type 7C U-boat slide into the dark Atlantic water. This is the new front. Without the distraction of the Eastern Front, every spare ton of steel, every drop of oil, and every able-bodied engineer is being poured into the Kriegsmarine. The Battle of the Atlantic is no longer a sideshow, it is the main event. The official propaganda in Berlin tells the people that Britain is a sinking ship. They show newsreels of burning merchantmen and starving Londoners. To the average German, it looks like victory is a matter of weeks. But beneath the surface, the reality is shifting. In London, Winston Churchill stares at a map of the North Atlantic. He isn't looking at the ships being lost. He's looking at the factories in Detroit. The Lend-Lease program isn't just a trickle anymore. It's a torrent. Without the Soviet Union absorbing German attention, the Luftwaffe is pounding the English ports every night, but the American industrial giant is waking up. The atmosphere in the Channel is one of a suffocating stalemate. The German Sea Lion invasion plan remains a fantasy. The Royal Navy is still too strong, so Hitler doubles down on the blockade. Europe is becoming a fortress sealed off from the world. But a fortress is also a cage. While Müller digs trenches in Poland to guard against a silent Stalin, and Krauss hunts convoys in the Atlantic, the declassified files of the British SOE reveal a terrifying trend. The occupied territories, France, Norway, the Low Countries, are beginning to burn. Without the quick victory in the east, the German army has to keep millions of men on garrison duty, breathing the toxic air of a population that hates them. They called it Fortress Europe. The men stationed there called it the Continental Prison. January 1943. Chelyabinsk, east of the Ural Mountains. The temperature is -40 degrees. The wind doesn't just blow, it carves. Inside Tankgrad, a factory that was once a tractor plant, the sound is a relentless, bone-shaking thunder. Starshina Alexei Volkov watches a T-34-76 tank roll off the assembly line. It is his fifth today. It will not be his last. In the what-if of the German High Command, the Soviet Union was supposed to sit idle, perhaps even continue selling grain and oil to the Reich. They assumed Stalin was a static variable. They were wrong. The inciting incident of this alternate history isn't a shot fired, it's the silence of the Soviet mobilization. While Hitler is obsessed with the Atlantic Wall and the U-boat war, Stalin has turned the entire USSR into a single massive furnace. Declassified Soviet archives from the 1990s tell us what was actually happening during those quiet years on the border. Stalin knew the German strike was coming eventually. He used the 2-year reprieve not to relax, but to move 1,500 factories to the east. He wasn't building a defensive army, he was building a steamroller. In the border towns of occupied Poland, Erich Müller hears the sound of heavy machinery at night, drifting across the Bug River. It's not just one truck, it's thousands. The Ivans are busy tonight, his sergeant says, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. Building roads, they say. The roads aren't for trade. By 1943, the Soviet Union has mobilized 12 million men. They have thousands of Katyusha rocket launchers, or Stalin's organs, and 10,000 tanks. They are no longer the disorganized rabble the Germans expected in '41. They are a modern, mechanized titan, and they are bored of waiting. The official narrative in Berlin is that the Eastern Guard is enough to deter any Bolshevik aggression. The hidden truth is that the German 18th Panzer Division is still using the same PZ-KPFW-3 tanks they had in '41, while the Red Army has spent 3 years perfecting the art of deep battle. The trap is set, and Hitler is still looking at the Atlantic. March 1944. The Abwehr headquarters, Berlin. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris sits in a room that smells of old paper and desperation. He is looking at a file marked Unternehmen Janos, Operation Janos. It is a collection of aerial reconnaissance photos taken by high-altitude Junkers U-86s flying over the Soviet interior. What the photos show is a nightmare. The German investigation into Soviet strength had been systematically softened by the SS and the High Command for years. They didn't want to hear that the Soviet Union was outproducing Germany in every category. They didn't want to hear that the inferior Slavs had developed a heavy tank, the IS-2, that could ignore the fire of a German Tiger from a kilometer away. If the Führer sees this, Canaris whispers to his aide, he will execute the man who took the picture. The conflicting reports are staggering. The military intelligence says the Soviets have 300 divisions on the border. The political reports sent to Hitler's desk say they have 50, and most are armed with pitchforks. This is the investigation phase of the disaster. The truth was hidden because the Nazi system was built on a lie, the belief in their own inevitable superiority. To admit the Soviets were ready was to admit the wait in 1941 was the greatest strategic blunder in the history of warfare. Survivor accounts from the Abwehr officers who fled to the West after the war confirm a terrifying reality. By 1944, the German army in the East was essentially a tripwire army. They were under strength, underfueled, and equipped with age in gear. Meanwhile, in the West, the Atlantic Wall is a beautiful, expensive, useless masterpiece. The Americans and British have successfully landed in Italy. The U-boat war has been lost. Allied technology, specifically centimetric radar and Bletchley Park's Enigma brakes, has turned the Atlantic into a graveyard for the Kriegsmarine. The investigation is complete. Germany is caught between an Allied hammer in the West and a Soviet anvil in the East. But the anvil is about to start moving. June 22, 1944. 3 years to the day after the invasion that never was. The sun is rising over the Bug River. Erich Müller is now a veteran, his face lined with the stress of 3 years of peace. He looks out at the same riverbank he saw in 41. The silence is broken. It starts with a sound that isn't human. It's the roar of 20,000 guns firing at once. This is Operation Bagration, but in this timeline, it is not a counterattack. It is a first strike. The twist revealed. Hitler thought he was buying time to consolidate Europe. He thought he was playing a game of grand strategy, but Stalin was playing a game of total annihilation. The Soviet Union doesn't just attack the border, they bypass it. Airborne divisions drop into the German rear. Massed tank armies, supported by the terrifying IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack planes, slice through the German lines like they aren't even there. "Where is the Luftwaffe?" Müller screams as his tank is engulfed in flames. The Luftwaffe is in the West, trying to stop the thousands of American B-17s that are turning German cities into ash. There is no air cover for the Eastern Guard. There are no reserves. Every tank, every shell, and every man has been spent on the fortress that is now being bypassed. The hidden truth revealed. Germany's Cold War in Europe was a self-inflicted wound. By waiting, they allowed the USSR to modernize without interference. In 1941, the Red Army was a mess. In 1944, it is the most powerful land force in human history. The Red Eclipse isn't just a battle, it's a tidal wave. In 6 weeks, the Red Army isn't at the Vistula, they are at the Oder. They are 40 miles from Berlin. The German commanders, the ones who survived, would later claim they were stabbed in the back by Hitler's decision to wait. But the declassified records show that the wait was the only thing that kept the Reich alive as long as it did. Had they invaded in 41, they would have died in the snow. By waiting until 44, they died in the sun, with the added horror of seeing exactly how much more powerful their enemy had become. May 1945. The ruins of the Reichstag, Berlin. The flag flying from the roof isn't German, it isn't American, it is the red banner of the Soviet Union. In this world, there was no D-Day. There was no race for Berlin between Eisenhower and Zhukov. By the time the Western Allies could organize a cross-channel invasion against a fully fortified Atlantic wall, the Red Army had already swallowed Germany whole. The closing of the script brings us to the consequences. The Cold War didn't start in 1947. It started the moment Hitler decided not to invade in 41. The suppressed cause of the total Soviet dominance in Europe was a simple mathematical error. The German High Command believed they could control the tempo of history. They believed they could choose when to fight the East. They forgot that the East has a vote. The legacy of this "what if" is a Europe that is entirely red. From the Atlantic coast of France to the Pacific port of Vladivostok, the Soviet shadow is absolute. Britain remains an isolated, starving island, a stationary aircraft carrier for an America that is now facing a Eurasian continent unified under a single, paranoid dictator. The unanswered question: was the invasion of Russia in 1941 actually Hitler's only chance? The declassified military history suggests a bitter irony. The Barbarossa invasion was a disaster that destroyed the Reich, but not invading was a catastrophe that destroyed Europe. Erich Müller's body was never found. He is just another entry in the millions of missing men who stood on the banks of the Bug River, waiting for a signal that came 3 years too late. The truth isn't that the Germans could have won. The truth is that by the time they realized they had lost, the world they were fighting for had already been erased by the very silence they once thought was safety.
If you love classic comparison battles and in-depth military history analysis like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss out. Go ahead and subscribe now, and we'll see you for the next battle.